Previously on The Food That Built America. Food pioneer Henry Heinz brought his iconic tomato ketchup to the world.
We're wiring this factory starting today.
And revolutionized the industrial process, creating an American dynasty. And shrewd visionary Asa Candler
I'll give you $300 for the rest of Coca-Cola.
Turned John Pemberton's formula for Coca-Cola into the first national soft drink, becoming the richest man in Atlanta. Now trailblazer Milton Hershey.
Damn it. Get out.
Bets on an unknown luxury called milk chocolate to make his fortune.
Make sure every sales manager has plenty of samples. They're gonna need them.
It's the start of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. A father and son duo named Frank and Forrest Mars create an iconic confection of their own.
I call it the Milky Way.
And they're gunning for Hershey's throne.
Hershey isn't our supplier. They're a competition.
C.W. Post used the ideas he took from John and Will Kellogg to launch a cereal empire. Now the brothers go to war with Post and each other.
I'm gonna bury you.
But it's Post's daughter, teamed with outdoorsman Clarence Birdseye, whose bold vision will reinvent the way the world eats.
Very, very good. Very, very good.
Will Kellogg has spent a year building his new cornflake company. For decades, he toiled in the shadow of his famous older brother, Dr. John Kellogg.
John Harvey Kellogg, he had this great reputation. Not only as a lecturer and a doctor, but he wrote best-selling books. And so tens of thousands of people per year came from around the country and around the world to meet the great Dr. Kellogg and to learn how to be healthy from him.
The only reason you work here is because you're my brother.
But he never missed a moment to humiliate or razz his brother.
You're not capable.
Now Will's cereal brand is growing quickly, thanks to the family name his brother made famous.
Will Kellogg bought the recipes from John Harvey Kellogg, and he added a little bit of malt sugar, not a lot, and he would put his name, his signature on it. And so it became Kellogg's Cornflakes. Will had to know that the name Kellogg was very marketable because of the doctor.
By 1907, he makes $178,000 in profit, nearly $5 million today. And he pours almost double that amount into making the name Kellogg synonymous with cornflakes.
WK had a brilliant mind and had business savvy. You know, only look for the box with my signature on it. The marketing of these things is genius.
The most important thing for spreading the national brand was advertising. It's going to change how word of mouth comes out about what type of food you should be eating. Industries are buying space in magazines saying, you need a biscuit. Jell-O takes off by advertising itself as America's most famous dessert. It wasn't famous at all, but they started an advertising campaign calling it that, and it took up.
Will Kellogg,
He had all sorts of amazing campaigns. He had these giant billboards, the largest billboard of his time that he put up in Times Square, similar things in Chicago. He had a whole campaign where they suggested to women that they wink at the grocer and that be a sign to give them the Kellogg cornflakes. So there was also sexual innuendo. He promoted the hell out of Kellogg's cornflakes.
By the early part of the 20th century, food becomes the biggest segment of the advertising market, beating out cosmetics, tobacco, and automobiles, with Will Kellogg leading the charge. Just a few miles away, Dr. John Kellogg is determined to strike back at his younger brother.
As Will Kellogg became more successful, John resented that. He didn't want his little brother to succeed, particularly with his name and his product.
John markets his own unsweetened cornflakes, using the same name and packaging, even though he sold the rights to Will.
When John Harvey Kellogg began to make his own Kellogg cereal, it was a threat to Will's company, because if people confused Will's product with Dr. Kellogg's product, which didn't taste as good, he would lose customers. No wonder Will Kellogg resented John Harvey Kellogg. He seethed with anger.
The Kellogg Company will someday be worth over $20 billion. The only question is, which one?
What the hell is this? I bought the recipes!
The rights aren't exclusive. And Kellogg is my last name.
I have tried with you, John. I really have. But if you weren't my brother, I swear.
You're nothing without my name. And you never were. You know, I used to pity you. Now I don't feel anything. You're pathetic.
I'm gonna bury you.
With the cornflakes legacy at stake, John and Will sue each other for the right to the Kellogg name and the massive fortune it represents. Meanwhile, C.W. Post oversees the dynasty he's built on ideas he took from the Kellogg's.
People forget how much industrial espionage there was. C.W. Post himself came to the sanitarium as a guest, and then he creates grape nuts.
By 1908, his company makes over $5.2 million, $147 million today. But cornflakes represent the first real threat it's ever faced.
At this point, Post still was marketing its products as a health supplement, whereas Will Kellogg is really selling his flakes as food and was enormously successful at it.
Years after a nervous disorder landed him at Dr. Kellogg's sanitarium, the stress of competition is taking its toll.
Why is it so cold in here all the time?
Cold? It's not that cold, sir.
Right. Well,
You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
you can go.
Post is a man who has been plagued by illness throughout his entire life. And just around the time the companies became rivals, C.W. Post's health problems started coming back.
Post is desperate to bring a cornflake of his own to market, and his illness makes him increasingly erratic.
I asked you to produce flakes 3/4 of an inch across. This is mush.
Whether he completely rips it off or not is another question. But if you think about C.W. Post's ethics, he was just like the other entrepreneurs of his time. He was part of that Robert Barron generation, after all. It was a time when ruthlessness was, if anything, admired.
I want you to find out what equipment Kellogg is using and who makes it. Get us whatever the hell he has.
Yes, sir.
Wait. Buy them out. Order 100 of them if you have to. I don't want anyone else to get one. I don't care how much it costs. Money's not an issue.
Post corners the market on Will Kellogg's proprietary flake rollers, cementing himself as Kellogg's fiercest competitor. "480 miles from Michigan, a local businessman is looking for a factory to mass produce an entirely new product that almost no American has ever tasted.
We're never going to find a perfect space.
I know.
We have to make a compromise somewhere. We've seen every available factory in Philadelphia.
I know.
The people who, in my experience, tend to be innovators are really kind of maniacal. They're not your average people.
Now you're taking me to the middle of nowhere. For what exactly?
Hang on, we're almost there.
The ambition comes from somewhere deep inside where you think, I can do this better, or I can find a way to make this process better, that product better. And I think that's really what America's about. And that has always been the ethos that drives our society.
This is where I want to build my factory.
I don't get it. There's nothing here. We're surrounded by cornfields.
They're not cornfields. They're dairy farms.
He hasn't yet created a product to sell, but he has a dream that will take the world by storm. And his vision is to build not just a factory, but an entire town to support it. His name is Milton Hershey. By the early 1900s, the average American worker makes roughly $400 a year.
The United States by 1900 has the most powerful economy in the world. And this permanent working class developed. And when you walked out each day, you had money in your pocket. And so this all of a sudden meant that there were people who were going to find things for the folks with cash in their pocket to spend the money on.
A typical family spends almost a quarter of its budget on housing, 15% on clothing, and a whopping 45% on food, creating a huge potential market for new products.
As much as creating successful brands is about innovation and imagination, there needs to be an understanding of the marketplace. And I think that's the key to real entrepreneurship, is being able to just see the next step, moving forward and taking that door when it opens to you and running through it when you're not quite sure what's on the other side.
In rural Pennsylvania, almost 100 miles from the nearest major city, Milton Hershey is gambling everything on an obscure product he believes is the next big thing. Investing $20,000, more than $500,000 today.
Careful, careful. Wasn't cheap.
Into equipment to make milk chocolate. It's virtually unknown in the US, but will someday be sold in 90 countries across the globe.
It was very popular in Europe, but here in the United States, nobody was making milk chocolate. And when Milton first tasted milk chocolate at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, he recognized that it was special.
Chocolate consumption dates all the way back to the ancient Mayans, who would drink chocolate beverages spiced with chili. Dark chocolate was common in Europe by the late 1600s. And in 1875, a Swiss baby formula manufacturer named Henry Nestle was the first to make milk chocolate.
And we all know the Nestle name. But what he was really famous for was he took the water out of the milk, and then he took the solids that were left, and he combined it with chocolate. People craved milk chocolate because it was more mellow in flavor. And as far as inventions go, it was quite late. The machine gun had been invented before milk chocolate. So just think about that for a minute.
These are nice.
Hershey left school without more than a 4th grade education to support his family. After an apprenticeship with a confectioner, he started his own caramel company, and in 1900, sold it for $1 million.
It actually made the front page of the New York Times when it was sold. That was enormous amount of money back then. But Milton Hershey took a risk. He went and invested his $1 million into making milk chocolate.
Hershey buys 1,200 acres of farmland in dairy country, where he will spend his entire fortune on building not just a factory, but a dream to build a utopia.
Yeah, these will all be housing, right? And then factory here, roads here?
Yep.
These dimensions are fine, but it doesn't have any personality.
Personality?
Hershey had this utopian vision, this idea that everyone would have things taken care of for them, like plumbing and electricity and all these modern conveniences that workers of the day couldn't even dream of. These were things that people just did not do for their employees.
Since the 1880s, remote industrial operations requiring hard labor, like coal mines and lumber yards, have been supported by company towns.
Very often, factories were built on relatively cheap land outside of cities. But in those days, automobiles didn't exist for the most part, and very often there weren't systems of urban transport. So the workers had to walk to work. Well, if the factory's outside of town, then you're going to have to build some place for them to live so they can walk to work.
Company towns are often dirty, poorly built, and expensive. But Milton Hershey is thinking much bigger. He doesn't even have a product to sell, but he's already building his ideal town.
He broke ground on the town before he ever finalized his own milk chocolate recipe, which is insane when you think about it, but that's what he did.
Yeah, these are boring. It all feels cheap. You want people to be happy to work here. If they're happy to work here, they'll take pride in their work. They'll work harder.
There certainly would be costs associated.
Fix it.
Construction will take nearly every penny of his $1 million investment. Now, he has to crack the formula for milk chocolate. C.W. Post has bought up all the flake rollers that Will Kellogg helped design, and he's using them to crank out cornflakes of his own. He calls them Post Toasties.
Will was furious when he found out that Charlie Post had bought the rollers for Post Toasties. Only so many machinists could make these types of products, which was very smart of Charles Post.
The genius of breakfast cereal is that you take a product that costs virtually nothing. You lightly process corn by cooking it and squashing it, and then you fill a box with it, and then you charge an enormous amount of money for the box. This was not lost on C.W. Post, and that is his genius.
Post hopes to gain ground while the Kellogg brothers battle each other.
Yep.
Just a few miles away.
Okay.
That fight is over. After years of abuse,
You're not capable. The only reason you work here is because you're my brother.
Will Kellogg, once his famous brother's lackey, has triumphed. Thanks to his brilliant marketing scheme, the courts rule that Will has sole ownership of Kellogg's cornflakes.
And it was all about who had the right to use the name Kellogg as a brand name. The doctor argued, I'm Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, I'm a world-renowned physician, I'm the real Kellogg. And Will Kellogg mentioned all the advertisements he did, the millions of dollars he spent, the tens of millions of people who read or saw his ads every year. And he said, I'm the more recognizable Kellogg.
All right, thank you.
And the Michigan State Supreme Court said, you know, Mr. Kellogg, not Dr. Kellogg, Mr. Kellogg, you're right. Your brand name is Kellogg's, and that's the recognizable one.
For John, it is a shocking defeat. Worse, the court orders John to cover all legal fees and forfeit all the profits he's made.
Thank you. Goodbye.
It was, in a way, it was trying to destroy his brother's legacy. It was grinding him out from the annals of history so that only the Will Kellogg Company would remain.
John turns his focus back to the sanitarium, and his groundbreaking research on diet and digestion earns him a seat on the Michigan Board of Health. But ultimately, the Battle Creek Sanitarium closes due to financial difficulties, and John eventually falls out of the public eye.
John Harvey Kellogg is a forgotten figure. A lot of concepts of better eating and wellness and preventing disease were developed by him. A lot of the food products that we enjoy were invented by him. He's just not given credit for it. And that's a pretty sad story in my view.
Will's victory over his brother is complete. Now, he's finally ready to go to war with C.W. Post.
Will Kellogg hated Charlie Post for stealing his ideas. And once somebody told Will Kellogg, you know, Charlie Post calls you a dirty dog. And Will said, well, you know what a dirty dog does to a post. And so there was a lot of animosity between them.
Will increases production, pushing his factory to the limit.
A little more than usual today.
Fire! No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Get out, everybody, back door. Everyone out. Come on, come on, come on.
In July 1907, Will Kellogg's cornflake factory burns to the ground, crippling his operation.
Do I even want to know?
Our stock has been completely destroyed. There's almost nothing left of the mixers. They're barely recognizable.
Damn it. At least nobody was hurt. Everything else is just details.
In the fire that destroyed Will Kellogg's factory, it also destroyed his rollers. And he realized that his baby, his creation, had burned to the ground.
Will needs to get up and running as fast as possible, or risk losing ground to his nemesis, C.W. Post. But when he orders a new set of flake rollers, he learns about Post's exclusive deal.
No, I heard what you said. I just don't understand it. I helped you design the damn things.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kellogg. I'd love to help you out, but there's no way we can take any new orders.
Name your price.
Can't do it. Our contract is exclusive. No new customers. I'm sorry.
Will was furious when he found out that Charlie Post had bought the rights to make rollers for Post Toasties. It was a malicious idea on Charlie Post's part, but Will was, he was a very wily guy. He could always get his way out of a problem.
What, you said no new customers, right?
That's right.
You bet I'm not a new customer.
What exactly is it you have in mind?
Fix up my rollers. The ones that went down the fire.
He picked the old rollers out of the rubble and said, your contract doesn't say anything about repairing rollers you already made, right? So with this loophole in place, they would actually not just fix the burnt rollers, but replace them. And then they sent them by secret along the train rails. His business almost was ruined, and it was his ingenuity that saved the day.
Will takes the modern equivalent of $2 million in loans and pours it into construction.
When Charlie Post heard about it, he just threw a fit, but it was already too late.
Why haven't these shipments left yet?
Where are my department managers? I'm calling a meeting. 15 minutes boardroom. Attendance mandatory.
Back to work.
He had some type of stomach or gastrointestinal problem that would cause all sorts of problems, from feeling nauseated to depression and what we might call a nervous breakdown.
Are you okay, sir? Sir?
Milton Hershey is doubling down on milk chocolate, building a factory and a town. Even after months of failure trying to crack the formula.
Milton Hershey was a lunatic. That was just sort of who he was. He wasn't afraid of taking risks. And, you know, he believed in himself enough to think that trial and error, I'm going to get it right. Probably a lesser person might have walked away from it, but that wasn't him.
European milk chocolate uses pre-packaged, condensed, or powdered milk. But Hershey believes he can use the nearly endless supply of fresh milk from local farms to mass produce his chocolate.
The problem is that milk has a lot of water, and chocolate has a lot of rich plant fat, cocoa butter. You try to mix oil and water, everybody knows that's near impossible. Milton Hershey didn't understand any of this. Milton Hershey was not a chemist. He was an experimenter. He was a dreamer. And he thought it would be a simple process to come up with his own version of milk chocolate.
It needs to be creamy. You know, rich but creamy.
Mm-hmm.
And smooth, you know, like you know there's fresh, delicious milk in there, even if you don't really taste it.
Got it.
To help him solve the formula, he brings in top chemists from across the nation.
Hey, where'd you say you went to school?
Princeton undergrad, doctorate at Cornell.
Wow. Why are the condensing and mixing so inconsistent?
I don't know yet, but that's what I'm here to find out.
I'll stay out of your way so you don't burn it.
Excuse me?
Your milk, that's gonna burn.
I promise you, I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Damn it. I'll need to start a new batch. I'll try mixing in the milk as it dehydrates.
Get out.
I'm sorry, what?
Just pack your things and get the hell out.
I think I just let it reduce too far. If I could have a little more time.
I'm not paying you to learn on the job.
In Europe, they use powdered milk.
I don't want to hear about how they do it in Europe. I'm using fresh milk. Period. Just go.
Milton Hershey was so committed to using fresh milk from the local dairy cows, he was doing experiments. At the same time, he was financing all of this money that he was putting into this town of Hershey, and he failed again and again. And it was very difficult. He was at the end of his rope.
Milton Hershey is on the brink of disaster, and he's running out of time. Far from Pennsylvania, the son of a once wealthy New Jersey family braves temperatures that reach 40 below. He's an avid outdoorsman and scientist, trapping fur and living off the land.
America as the land of opportunity is essential to the way that we think about entrepreneurship and innovation. The common person could see themselves achieving wealth, and that is very important.
His name is Clarence Birdseye. And here in the frigid Canadian wilderness, the startling discovery he makes will give rise to a $220 billion industry. Deep in the Canadian wilderness, Clarence Birdseye carves out a life for himself after his once prominent family lost their fortune. He survives on his own, making money as a fur trapper, living much like the Inuit natives.
Clarence Birdseye was very interested in nature, and he always had a tremendous sense of adventure. But he ended up dropping out of school for financial reasons. He was one of these kids who just wanted to take everything apart and see how it worked.
Birdseye subsists largely on something most Americans at the time don't eat: frozen food.
Americans certainly associated frozen foods with being gross. It was on the bland side, sort of mushy. It's not like frozen foods we know today.
Nobody wanted it because it was terrible. It was terrible because it was frozen very slowly. So it was kind of rotting as it was freezing. It was served in prisons, but prison reformers complained about it and tried to stop it from being served there. And it just was the worst food in the world.
Frozen food technology is virtually non-existent, barely changed from the ancient Roman technique of packing food in compressed snow, or in cold cellars filled with ice. But the local Inuits produce a much better product, using the frigid local temperatures to freeze fish almost instantly.
The frozen food that Birdseye ate in Labrador was really very good. And so he began experimenting.
When you freeze something slowly, you make these gigantic ice crystals inside of the cell. And the jagged edges of this ice crystal pierce the cell wall. So when it thaws, all that liquid runs out. And that's why things look disgusting and withered and shriveled and devoid of taste. A fast freeze allows small ice crystals to create within the cell. So upon thawing, the cell wall is still intact and the flavor is still preserved.
Birdseye figured out that if you freeze fish fast enough, it's as good as fresh.
Birdseye realizes that if he can replicate the fast freezing process, he'll be able to apply it not just to fish, but to every food imaginable.
Before frozen food, foods were seasonal. You ate foods that were fresh, you ate foods that were available at that time of year. There's not a lot of access to various kinds of vegetables.
People would often buy fresh meat from butchers and meat packers, and you end up with meat rotting and becoming putrid before you eat it.
Birdseye sees an opportunity to return to the US and capitalize on a process few in the world understand. But the technology to do it doesn't exist yet. Milton Hershey hasn't perfected his milk chocolate formula. Construction on his factory continues. And now he's doubling down on his gamble, hiring workers, and a head of sales named William Murray.
Milton Hershey. Pleasure to meet you.
William Murray was apparently quite a good salesman. Hershey's struck by him. He sees value in him immediately. Successful people, I think, are able to realize their shortcomings and to find people around them to fill that void and to make them better.
Well, heard a lot of good things about you, so I'm just gonna cut right to the chase. I'll beat whatever you're making now, plus commission on top.
What's the hook?
It's milk chocolate. It's almost unheard of outside of Europe. But once we get people to try it, they're gonna want more. It'll sell itself.
Do you have any product I could take a look at?
No, not at the moment, but I will.
So you're hiring me to sell something that doesn't exist, people don't know anything about, that's also gonna sell itself?
Is that a problem? Great. Happy to have you on board.
Looking forward to it.
Hershey is bleeding money, and if he can't produce a product, all his dreams will come crashing down. Will Kellogg has taken on today's equivalent of millions of dollars in debt, replacing his industrial flake rollers and rebuilding his factory.
When the cornflake factory burned down, it was very hard to get loans, and he found one banker who had faith in him. And it was about $100,000, which was more than $1 million then, and it was a very real risk.
After just 6 months, Will Kellogg is back in the game. And winning. 3 shifts of workers keep the factory running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Please. Very good, very good.
And by 1909, output of Kellogg's cornflakes increases from 4,000 cases per day to 120,000, leaving Post Toasties in the dust. Meanwhile, C.W. Post slides further into illness.
I'm not hungry.
And steps away from day-to-day operations at the company he spent his life building.
I'm going for a walk.
At that point, he was a very wealthy man and spent a lot of time traveling. I sort of wonder about him being out of touch with his business and being, in a way, forced to relax. It may have been stress more than anything else.
Post tries everything from vacationing in Europe to founding a town in Texas still named after him and trying to irrigate it by dynamiting the clouds. But it does nothing to ease his debilitating stomach pain.
C.W. Post has been plagued by illness throughout his entire life. He claimed that grape nuts would cure everything from appendicitis to, impotence. Of course, it doesn't cure him, and that's the great irony. He was one of the richest men in the country. But despite the money, despite this incredible success, he's left with the same debility he had when he entered the sanatorium.
Suffering more than ever, Post becomes convinced that he's dying of stomach cancer and decides to do the unthinkable. Milton Hershey's factory is nearly complete, and workers are moving to his company town. He's spent over $25 million in today's dollars, and if he can't start making a profit, he'll lose everything. Desperate to find a formula for milk chocolate, Milton Hershey calls on a former employee, an experienced candy maker named John Schmalbach.
Should it be taking this long to make a batch?
This is fine. Just let me concentrate.
Do you need more equipment? You know, everybody else brought a lot of stuff. This doesn't seem like very much stuff to me. Right. Sorry.
John Schmalbach. I don't want to call him a chemist because he had no formal degree, but he was one of the people Hershey knew early on that he trusted.
It's not perfect, but try it. Let me know if this is better or worse than what you've been getting.
What do you think's not right about it?
The texture is good, but there's a little hint of sourness that we could eliminate.
No. Don't change anything. Did you write down what you did? So you can do it again.
Of course.
What's really kind of amazing is Hershey himself, you know, creating milk chocolate, using these dairies. I sometimes look at myself and I go, would I have given up under these circumstances? I think that a lot of people in the modern age look at brands like Hershey's and just think, well, it must have been easy to establish. I could be a Hershey's. And people don't realize that the risk was massive.
This is fantastic.
The formula that Milton Hershey ultimately came up with had what people called sour notes, which actually means in his process of condensing, he soured his milk. He didn't realize at the time that his chocolate didn't taste like European chocolate. He just knew he had a formula that worked, and it was the first in the US. So we have become accustomed to the Hershey flavor. Hershey now goes to great lengths to keep that sourness in the chocolate, to protect that unique flavor.
Here, take this. Take it, John. You earned it. Thank you.
Hershey pays Schmalbach a $100 bonus for his contribution. But the distinct flavor it produces will go on to be worth billions. On May 9th, 1914, national headlines announced the tragic death of C.W. Post. Hundreds come to pay their respects to a Battle Creek legend.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And mourn the loss of a true titan of industry.
The idea of the self-made millionaire was very much an American ideal. There were the Fords, there were the Rockefellers, and C.W. Post takes that model and applies it to a food product. Without people like C.W. Post, the American food landscape would look very, very different than it does now.
Please accept my sympathy. Thank you.
C.W. Post leaves behind a personal fortune estimated at $22 million, the modern equivalent of more than $550 million. And in a stunning move for the era, he leaves not just the bulk of his wealth, but control of his company to a woman, his 27-year-old daughter, Marjorie. At the time, less than 20% of all college graduates are female, and women don't even have the right to vote.
Women had been involved in factories since the early 19th century, but they would work for a while, and then most of them had the idea that they'd get married and they'd have children and they'd step out of the paid workforce. You never saw them in positions of ownership or at the highest levels of corporate management.
C.W. Post wanted to raise her like the son he never had.
It's okay to have fun while you're working. You look so serious. You're so serious. If it's not fun, you can't do it. Okay.
C.W. Post would have his board meetings, and she would be there under the table with him, and he taught her every aspect of the business.
The company is struggling in the wake of its founder's death, and now rests in the hands of an inexperienced young woman. But her leadership will completely reinvent it. For Will Kellogg, the death of his greatest rival brings an end to his long battle for cereal supremacy.
By every imaginable metric, he won. He beat his brother, and he outpaced C.W. Post, so that by World War II, the Kellogg cereal company had 50% of the world's cereal market.
Today, Will Kellogg's company is valued at nearly $20 billion, boasting familiar products like Rice Krispies, Frosted Flakes, Raisin Bran, even Pop-Tarts, and Eggo waffles.
He created not only one of the major food companies in the world, but he also created the W.K. Kellogg Foundation.
Will's charitable organization, with an $8.6 billion endowment, still helps disadvantaged children all across the globe.
Will Kellogg could never imagine himself as this giant mogul, but the impact of ready-to-eat cold cereal was enormous. It was a game changer. It was the iPhone of its day, if you will. Everybody wanted some. So in a way, it was the job Will was born to do, even if he didn't know it.
After 2 years spent building his factory and his town, Milton Hershey is finally armed with the milk chocolate formula he's been waiting for.
Let's take a look.
Wrapped in its iconic brown wrapper, the Hershey bar is about to take the United States by storm.
Make sure every sales manager has plenty of samples. They're gonna need them.
Milton Hershey is the first to mass-produce milk chocolate, quickly turning an obscure European luxury into an American staple.
Milton Hershey's vision was to give the average consumer this delicacy, once viewed as this, thing for only kings and queens and on special occasions, and make it an everyday item for folks in the U.S.
Sales reach $5 million, $135 million today, making Milton Hershey a true American chocolate tycoon.
He's just so fascinating because here's a man who really was a titan, just like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the J.P. Morgans. But instead of having this raw metal or iron product, his product is chocolate.
Then, on July 28, 1914, simmering unrest in Europe explodes into the First World War. Over 4 bloody years, more than 15 million die. The United States joins the conflict in 1917, and resources are quickly diverted to the war effort.
In May of 1917, Herbert Hoover is appointed as Federal Food Administrator for the United States. There was no mandatory rationing, but Hoover used a combination of propaganda and peer pressure to really try and coerce Americans into following these rules, which included things like meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays, which are the most famous. As the war dragged on, they did actually formally ration sugar.
To avoid sugar rationing,
You draw this?
Milton Hershey uses a brilliant strategy.
The tar house here, the mill over here, fields here, here, and here.
Opening his own sugar refinery in Cuba.
These are good.
Complete with a mill town and railroad.
Being a visionary, he realized that there was a shortage, and he wanted to insulate his company against it. So despite World War I, Hershey profits continue to increase in large part because of his venture in Cuba.
In Europe, the war destroys food production, leading to shortages across the continent.
It's a watershed period that transforms the 20th century into the American century. In Europe, people are starving. And that's why the big American food companies joined to help produce more food and have it sent overseas to our allies.
The U.S. food industry expands international shipments, growing from $190 million in exports before the war to over $510 million at its height. When the war ends in 1918, the United States emerges as an economic powerhouse.
The destruction took place in Europe. The construction and the production of all this stuff took place in America. So World War I gave the U.S. economy a great shot in the arm. For the first time, electricity enters homes all over the country. For the first time, ordinary people can buy automobiles.
In this new booming economy, the Hershey Company manufactures millions of pounds of chocolate a year, with sales topping $20 million, over $250 million today. And Milton Hershey's best salesman is now the company's president.
Milton Hershey had a lot of different interests. He had a town to run. So Muri was really the chief operating officer, while Milton was the CEO. He became Milton's right-hand man.
The Hershey Company is synonymous with milk chocolate, with no clear rival. Then,
Gosh, she's looking at you, boys. She wants you.
a 19-year-old college student raised in Canada works a summer job hanging cigarette ads.
I mean, look at that gaze, man.
His name is Forrest Mars,
She's wanting it. Oh, mon chéri.
and he'll someday rival Milton Hershey as an American chocolate tycoon. But for now, he's in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Forrest wound up getting arrested because he plastered signs up for cigarettes all up and down State Street in Chicago. He didn't know anyone in the States at all, and so he needed somebody to bail him out.
He calls his father, Frank Mars, a modestly successful candy maker in nearby Minnesota. It's the first time they're seeing each other since Forrest's mother left Frank when Forrest was a baby.
He knew absolutely nothing about who his dad was. He knew his name, but he'd never met him, and he'd never heard very much about him.
You're welcome.
But he reached out to his dad, and the two of them met under those circumstances for the very first time.
After his first company failed, Frank's new business, the Morrow Bar Company, is a local hit, selling candy mostly in Minneapolis.
That's a pretty nice shirt.
Yeah, things are good. Who doesn't like chocolate and candy, right?
Yeah, everybody likes chocolate. So how come I haven't seen any of your stuff in Chicago?
Well, different markets, different tastes.
Yeah, sure, because nobody eats Hershey bars in California, right? I mean, take these malts. People drink these across the country. So why don't you just make a chocolate bar that tastes like a malted milkshake? No, I'm serious.
There wasn't a candy bar business at the time. There were a lot of chocolate bars out there. But the idea of the candy bar being the staple of candy was really something that's very different. And that got Frank Mars thinking.
Forrest's simple idea will give rise to one of the most popular candy bars in the world, launch a $35 billion empire, and rip his family apart. In the wake of World War I, the U.S. economy continues to boom, ushering in the roaring 20s.
By 1920, consumerism really sets in American life. And there is a demand to have the latest, to have the best, to have the flashiest. The notion of conspicuous consumption. We're going to consume stuff to show the world that we can do this.
Fueled by this new spirit of consumerism, groundbreaking new products flood the market, including the vacuum cleaner, the washing machine, and the wireless radio. Marjorie Post recognizes the opportunity in this new age. Not content to be a wealthy serial heiress, she has a vision of transforming her father's company into something much bigger.
There was a time when women were not serving as chairman of the board. A lot of the business decisions that she made were done privately in her home. In those rooms in this magnificent Tudor mansion, she worked and had a lot of influence to move this company forward.
We would be irresponsible not to anticipate the impact on our business. We need to take care of everything that we...
Sorry to keep you waiting. I figured this would be more comfortable than the boardroom.
Young lady, we're very...
Ms. Post.
Ms. Post.
Years before major food conglomerates are common, Marjorie directs her company to snap up well-known brands like Maxwell House Coffee, Log Cabin Syrup, Jell-O, and Hellmann's Mayonnaise. Expanding from a cereal company to a food juggernaut.
Marjorie was very strategic and a visionary, just like her father was. She's the reason why the company became the success it is.
That will be all. Let's get moving.
Sales skyrocket, and by 1927, profits reached $13.6 million, over $200 million today. And she isn't finished expanding. By 1927, Clarence Birdseye is back in the U.S. with a vision to freeze food in a revolutionary way.
Frozen food defies nature. Food technology and science take over and make things available that people have never seen at different times of year in different places. Now food isn't confined by geography anymore. That idea of totally exploding space and time is kind of mind-boggling if you really think about it.
But he has a problem. A process for freezing food as fast as Labrador's negative 40-degree temperatures doesn't exist.
At the time, you had drying food, smoking. Then you had pickling, and then you had canning. But frozen food, nobody had done that. He takes the idea that he had observed from the First Nation people in Canada and develops a company he thinks is really going to take off.
Birdseye raises the modern equivalent of $5.5 million in capital and consults with freezer manufacturers and engineers, working to build a proprietary quick freezing system from the ground up.
He hadn't yet entirely figured out the fast freezing process that would work, but he was willing to take tremendous risks. He was taking everything he had and staking it on some crazy company.
That is the low convection tunnel?
I think so.
What does that mean? Did you build the thing?
This is all your design. It's only called that because that's what you wanted to call it.
Just keep building it. Okay? Follow the schematics as best you can.
Birdseye's brilliant design is called multi-plate freezing. 2 metal plates are cooled to 50 degrees below zero. Then food is loaded into a pressurized container and held between the plates, freezing them almost instantly, locking in nutrition and taste. Today, the frozen food industry is worth more than $250 billion worldwide and is one of the biggest segments of the grocery market. And it all starts here with Clarence Birdseye.
You know, Clarence Birdseye used this inspiration to revolutionize frozen food. Really, frozen food has made the lives of parents and people on the go so easy, myself included. My favorite recipe in the world is my mom's spinach pie, and it calls for Birdseye frozen spinach. I probably have 2 boxes of spinach in my fridge right now.
Okay, that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those. Yeah, just keep stacking them there. If that gets filled up, just fill it in here. Come on in.
Clarence Birdseye is so convinced that he's found the next big thing that he immediately ramps up production.
Stack that there, if you would, guys. Yep. If we're running out of space, we can go back, okay?
Even though in 1928, fewer than 1 in 10 Americans even have a refrigerator. In Minneapolis, after years of estrangement, Frank and Forrest Mars work together on an idea that'll launch an American dynasty for one of them. It's a candy bar meant to taste like a malted milkshake.
Just take a bite.
I'm not in this alone.
All right.
You sure? No, it's not a milkshake.
It's not bad, though.
Yeah, but remember, we're going for a milkshake. Do we have any more?
Yeah, we got some.
Frank Mars was trying to understand how he could make this work.
How about this one?
Finally, after many failures, he tried a mixture of eggs and milk and sugar and whipped it all together, and he added malt flavor to it. And And ultimately, he developed the Nougat Center.
The brilliant recipe uses light, creamy nougat and caramel, covered in a thin layer of milk chocolate.
That's a keeper.
Revolutionizing the candy bar.
The thing that Mars discovered is that when you're taking nougat and you're whipping it to make it soft and light, you're reducing the actual ingredients in the candy bar because there's a lot of whipped air inside, and it makes them actually cheaper to make because air is free.
Spot on.
In order to mass produce his new invention, Frank Mars needs a steady supply of milk chocolate. And by the late 1920s, there's only one place to get it.
Perfect. No, it's absolutely perfect. It's happy, it's bright, puts you in a good mood when you look at it.
At the time, there was only one real master of the universe when it comes to chocolate in the United States, and that would be Milton Hershey. He defines the space.
The Hershey Company was providing ingredients and finished chocolate products to a lot of other manufacturers, and it became a big part of the Hershey business. In fact, everybody knows Oreo cookies, but they probably don't know that the original chocolate flavor in Oreos came from Milton Hershey.
Oh, you don't have phones out there in Minnesota?
Well, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer to do business face-to-face.
It's a long way to come for a short conversation. Look, I read your proposal, and I respect your dedication, but I just can't take that kind of risk.
I get it. I don't know that I'd take a risk on me either. But I'm not asking for a lot. Just a modest line of credit on your chocolates, so I can expand production. On this. I call it the Milky Way.
The Milky Way will someday generate more than $100 million in yearly sales. But for now, its fate rests in the Hershey Company's hands. Frank Mars is in enemy territory, determined to walk away with the milk chocolate he needs to create a candy empire of his own.
I'm not asking for a lot. Just a modest line of credit on your chocolates, so I can expand production. On this. I call it the Milky Way. Give it a try.
Not bad.
See what I mean? Irresistible.
Tell you what. Why don't I bring this by, Mr. Hershey?
That's all I ask. I appreciate it.
Frank Mars went to Hershey, and he asked William Ury if they would become his supplier. At the time that he requests their assistance, he isn't a huge success. He's an unknown from Minneapolis, St. Paul.
William Ury recognizes Mars as a threat and goes to Milton Hershey, hoping to nip it in the bud.
Try this. It's a combination of whipped nougat, caramel, and milk chocolate. Have a bite.
I'm all right.
He wants to buy chocolate from us on credit. I think we should look into buying this. We'd be eliminating a competitor and expanding our product range.
A competitor? There's no one in our league. What markets is he in?
His hometown in Minneapolis.
so he's not much of a threat. Give him a line of credit if you want to. And if you're worried about this guy suddenly getting too big, make it an exclusive deal. For his only supplier, we get a piece of the action no matter what happens. Happy?
Milton Hershey and William Murray took a risk in deciding that they would also support Frank Mars. I don't think they had any idea what they were getting into at the time, or certainly didn't understand the incredible success that Frank Mars would find with his candy bars.
Instead of eliminating a rival, they're helping it grow. Clarence Birdseye has raised $370,000 to start his business. Nearly $5.5 million today.
Is that it? Go get on the truck before it thaws.
His groundbreaking technology freezes meat, fish, fruits, and vegetables. He even experiments with alligator and whale. The problem is, nobody's buying any of it.
The problem with frozen food was that nobody had freezers. People didn't have freezers in their home. Stores didn't have freezers. Trucks and trains didn't have freezers for transporting frozen food.
There have to be major changes in American society before refrigeration or freezing really comes into everybody's homes. You can't have a refrigerator without electricity.
By the mid-1920s, almost half of American households still don't have electricity. And the icebox, a simple cupboard with a block of ice at the bottom, is what most Americans use to keep food cold. The electric refrigerator was invented more than a decade before, in 1913, but they're expensive and slow to catch on. Clarence Birdseye is bleeding money and has yet to make a single dollar of profit on his frozen food. With a clever plan to use Hershey's chocolate as a coating, Frank and Forrest Mars quickly grow the Milky Way from a local hit to a national brand.
The greatest thing about the Milky Way was that it looked enormous next to the nickel Hershey bar because it sat up high and it looked twice as big, but it was also a nickel. So people thought, oh my God, there's so much more value. I'm gonna buy a Milky Way.
Within 2 years of its invention, sales of the Milky Way reach $800,000, the modern-day equivalent of $12 million. But a power struggle is brewing between father and son.
Forrest takes credit for this invention, telling everyone that it came from his meeting with his dad when they had this little conversation in the diner that afternoon in Chicago. He was eager to take credit for anything that his father did. That was just in his nature. He was very, very driven.
I got you a little something.
Nice. Thank you.
You don't like it?
No, it's a nice shirt. I just don't think I get it.
It's the same one that you liked that day we had the malteds, remember?
Huh.
It's my way of saying I'm proud of you. Look around. This is everything I've ever wanted, and you are a part of it.
I don't want a shirt. I want to be put in charge of the East Coast Division.
But we don't have an East Coast Division.
No, exactly. You're acting like we've won, and we're not even in the game yet. You want to win? You have to start thinking bigger. Hershey isn't our supplier. They're a competition.
Forrest pushes his father toward all-out war with one of the most powerful food empires in the country. In 1927, Hershey's sales of raw milk chocolate to third parties are spiking, accounting for over 20% of their revenue, hiding an attack from their biggest challenger right in plain sight.
Hey, do I have to give you a raise? Looking at these numbers, this is a ton of raw product you must be selling around the clock.
Well, I'll take the money if you're offering, but that's just for one account.
Huh. Okay, take back the raise. Where's this all going? Looks like enough for a small country.
Minneapolis. Frank Mars.
Mars was Hershey's biggest customer. Mars Candy Company represented a huge part of Hershey's sales. Few people understand that two companies that we see today as enormous competitors, that if you look back in their history, cooperation started it all.
Mars. Right.
Threatened by the Milky Way's success,
Bitter.
Hershey immediately starts innovating new products, touching off years of one-upmanship with Mars.
One's on the right had a little more of a roasted flavor. I think it might go well with the milk chocolate.
Hershey introduces Hershey syrup and the iconic peanut-filled Mr. Good bar, while Mars introduces a bar with Neapolitan-flavored nougat called Three Musketeers, and a version of the Milky Way with peanuts he names the Snickers bar.
Frank has a favorite horse named Snickers, and they named their third chocolate bar Snickers after their horse. I always wondered if Snickers looked peanuts because that's one of the main ingredients in a Snickers bar.
And we can mass produce it very quickly.
Like Hershey's doing.
Well, we have to compete.
There's a mutual history here. If it wasn't for Hershey giving Mars chocolate, he might not necessarily have become this enormous success. And you have to look at both companies as a single story that's built the candy industry in America. There's a lot of mutual connection here that people don't understand.
Mars's sales balloon to the modern equivalent of more than $460 million a year, while Hershey's sales skyrocket to more than $600 million, keeping him in the lead for now. But the fight is far from over.
Shoulders back for me. Look straight here. Tilt your head slightly. Breathe in. Breathe out. Perfect.
Marjorie Post's plan to build a food conglomerate is working. Her company is worth almost $3 billion in today's dollars. She is one of the wealthiest women in the country and owns lavish estates all across the nation.
She built a home in Palm Beach, Florida, by the sea, called Mar-a-Lago. Eventually, she would sell the property to the government, and then the government eventually sold it to our current president of the United States, Donald Trump.
But Marjorie isn't satisfied, and she has her sights set on a struggling new business that's nearly out of cash, but will someday be worth $1.3 billion.
Okay, so it's these two, this one, and that one.
Clarence Birdseye's flash frozen food business has yet to turn a profit.
Let's keep it moving.
And he needs an influx of cash to keep it afloat.
Okay. All right. Let me know when that's handled. Okay. Thank you.
Hello. I'm looking for Clarence Birdseye.
What can I do for you?
Tell him Marjorie Post is here to see him about a business opportunity.
Post? I mean, like, post. Wow. Well, my name is Clarence Birdseye. Nice to meet you. Come on in, I'll show you around. It's our freezer. I can already freeze more haddock than the fisherman can catch. I can do fruits, vegetables, meat, anything. The problem is I can't ship it anywhere. Most trains don't have freezer cars, and even if they did...
There's no way for people to keep it frozen.
Exactly. So for now, all our sales are local. Folks let it thaw and eat it the same day.
And who are your biggest competitors?
I'm not sure I have any.
None. Come on, who else is doing this?
No one. The whole process, top to bottom, everything from the equipment to the packaging, it's all proprietary.
And who controls the patents? You?
All 200 of them.
Marjorie Post was a very savvy business person who went around acquiring interesting food companies. New England was her turf, and somebody told her about this guy who was doing frozen fish in Gloucester, and she went and checked it out, and she thought, this is an idea with a future. I think we'll buy it.
Let's say I wanted to make you an offer. What would it take to buy all of them? All of this. Your problem is distribution. You said it yourself. Without the money behind you, you'll never be able to build the infrastructure to turn this from a local curiosity to a profitable national business. That's what I can offer. Name a price. I'm not leaving until you give me a number.
12 million.
For everything?
75%.
I'm not interested in owning 3/4 of anything. How much for the rest?
You willing to do it for another 10 million?
So 22 altogether. I'll have the paperwork sent over in the morning. And you'll stay on as president of the division to run things under our umbrella. On salary. If that works for you?
Yeah. Yeah, that works.
Good. Well, congratulations.
Convinced that frozen food is the way of the future, Marjorie Post makes the biggest gamble of her life, buying Clarence Birdseye's struggling company for the modern equivalent of more than $300 million.
A lot of people felt that they had overpaid for the company, and it was actually investigated in the Senate. Marjorie Post was asked why they spent so much for this kind of crazy frozen food thing. The total assets were a fraction of what they paid. And they said, well, we weren't paying for the frozen food, and we weren't paying for the freezers, we were paying for the patents.
Clarence Birdseye is now rich beyond his wildest dreams, but no less determined to make the company he built into a success. Marjorie Post renames her company General Foods and uses her enormous resources to help Birdseye pioneer frozen food from coast to coast.
He worked with a refrigerator company on a design for a store freezer that had a window in the top so you could look in and see what was there. They got stores to get in on this experiment. They didn't make them buy the freezers, they installed the freezers for free. And this opportunity turned up the tremendous amount of publicity.
Today, frozen food is the second biggest seller in grocery stores around the world. And Birdseye still leads the pack, owning a third of the frozen vegetable market, more than any competing brand, making Clarence Birdseye the first true titan of frozen food.
When you look at any of these innovators, there's a certain kind of drive and personality you need to have in order to be this successful. But if you have that sort of perseverance and you know you've got that personality to carry something through, it could lead to, I mean, ridiculous success.
Marjorie Post is the most successful woman of her day and a business tycoon decades ahead of her time.
Marjorie Merriweather Post, in her day, was the world's wealthiest woman. And she was an icon and an advocate for women. She, in her own right, was a leader and someone that other women really did look up to.
Led by brilliant industrialists like Marjorie Post and Clarence Birdseye, the 1920s are a time of unparalleled wealth and technological advancement. But what no one realizes is that it's about to come to a crushing end. On the next episode of The Food That Built America, Mac and Dick McDonald design a new system that turns their restaurant into an assembly line.
Start working!
That will generate untold wealth for an ambitious salesman named Ray Kroc.
The American people will never forget the name McDonald's.
The Mars family power struggle.
This is my company.
30% or I walk out that door.
Leads to an unlikely alliance.
Mars and Murray. That has a ring to it.
And the creation of an American empire. And a visionary Southern maverick.
You're gonna want to see this.
Carves out an iconic legacy at all costs.